So I was going to talk about poetry and community, and I prepared a whole thing. So why don't we can just talk, I guess. I'll just say that this event and the readings that she has here that Anna's been doing are really a big part of what I see as being a good thing that people, should be doing for other writers and for the community and for people to see poets and get to know them and see them in the community. So one thing I did do a few years was I ran a reading series with some other people at Casa Romanica in San Clemente, and that sort of was a really fun thing to do, and it brought me into contact with a lot of other writers. And I think it was that lesson and some others that sort of was like, these are good things you should be doing when you're a little more established and have time to help out other writers and to keep yourself in the loop with what's going on, as well as some editing and then that I do. And then also as my other job as a librarian, we do this event called Literary Orange, and that's every April. So I'm kind of focusing on that now in terms of events. So what do you want to talk about? Does anybody have any questions or? Yeah, go ahead.
You use some really specific phrases in your poems, like you have a word that was like specified the biographies of saints.
Uh-huh.
I was wondering where in your background, like you would.
Hagiography. Well, I'm a Catholic. I was raised Catholic, so probably just having, in a way, as an older person, examined the fact that when I was a child, I read little hagiographies. Like. We read these books called 6 O'Clock Saints, and they were sort of how wonderful these people were and the things they did, and they were definitely positive spins on their lives and very inspirational. So I think it's an interesting term because, it's used a lot when you talk about, well, like, say recently Steve Jobs died, and it was sort of a hagiographic look at him, which he deserves to a certain extent, but in other words, it left out the parts of him that were negative because people are remembering those things about him. So I think it's an interesting word. It has a lot of richness to it. Anything else? Anybody else? Okay.
This is pretty specific, but the poem Diagnosis Psychosis,
Mm-hmm.
And if it's just a literal meaning, I know it's related to Blanche Dubois, and it's got that streetcar. I really like that poem.
Thank you.
What? Can you tell me about the poem?
Well, it's I have dealt with mental illness and a mentally ill person, and in my family, and actually in my job as a librarian, one thing you don't know that's going to happen is that you're going to deal with a lot of mentally ill people. So I have learned a lot about it. Not necessarily something I wanted to do, but I have. And I did have an experience of being in a mental ward and what that was like. And it was, very troubling. And so I guess just from that I had to write about it. And I guess I've seen the dark. In other words, there's a misplaced advocacy out there that doesn't really help mentally ill people, leaves them on their own, and they do a lot of damage. There's also a kind of hagiography, if you will, of mentally ill people that their motives, that they can't be bad. They're sick, but they can also do bad things. So I guess that's what I was trying to get at in that poem was that, like a Blanche Dubois, this person that's going around, depending on the kindness of strangers. You're in a victim situation, you're in a con artist situation at the same time. We can get into public policy, but it's something that I feel very strongly about, actually, that there's a misplaced advocacy that has not done right by mentally ill people, addicts, or homeless people. And I just happen to have had 20 years worth of working with that as kind of a thing that I didn't expect to, but I have. So that's kind of where that comes from for me.
Can you talk a little bit more about your background on how you became a poet and
Oh,
how
sure.
you became a librarian?
Okay, sure.
And whether or not those intersect,
Okay.
if they intersect with some of these poems.
Okay. Yeah, I like the poem Library, does. Um, well, I went to, and this kind of ties into what I was going to talk about. I got my MFA at Iowa in 1986. And at that time, there weren't as many MFA programs. And we were kind of, well, it was kind of an era of, everybody needs to be a business major. But there weren't as many MFA programs. And I had a sister who had an MFA in art, and I had seen her sort of just struggle along with part-time jobs and stuff. So I decided that I wanted to get a job where I could get a job and support myself. I didn't want to have to take a chance of not getting a teaching job. And I had always considered being a librarian because I had worked in libraries. So I decided to do that after my MFA. And I found that it was a really useful thing to do in a bunch of ways for my writing. One of which was, for some reason, not focusing totally on writing and poetry sort of allowed me to write more for some reason. And I had some different influences on my thinking, reading, and having that kind of a job gave me a different insight into why people read, what they're reading, met different kinds of people, intelligent people who didn't necessarily read poetry. And I saw that as time went on, I sort of had these dual careers going on, that there were ways I could bring poetry into my library career. For instance, when we have Literary Orange, I find the poets for the panel. I make sure that they're good poets and that we're not, I'm careful about that. I can help out with stuff like that for the library. And then skills that I've learned being a librarian and a manager, being able to talk to people, and I'm really good with managing, administrating, those kind of things that I didn't think I was when I was 23, 25, when I graduated with my MFA. And I've brought those to things like, planning an event or editing. I'm editing some online journals. And I find that I really enjoy the interaction with people that way and reading their work. I've helped some friends with their manuscripts. And I find that the same thing that I bring to, say, dealing with an employee, setting goals, maybe overcoming difficulties, encouraging them, I can bring to that. And I guess that's what my advice to you was, sort of a kind of a cookbook kind of advice versus maybe somebody else might give you a craft lesson or something, or the chemistry of it, is that the things you may not know about yourself now, you'll bring to your poetry career later. And to not expect things will change throughout your life. And there's skills you may get from a totally different way you go in life that you may not be thinking about now. Because when I was in school, it was sort of like, if you don't go be a teacher, what are you going to do? And actually, there are many examples of people who didn't live like that. Wallace Stevens and William Carlos Williams. And even now, I know people who are like that. And so I think it's a good thing to just keep in mind that you can be part of the community in different ways, and that you should be part of it, because everybody relies on each other to keep it going. And when you're young, it seems like a tall order, but then I think when you get older, it's a matter of, I give a little money to different publishers that I like, and I buy books, even though I can get them at my library. I buy them, things like that, to support the community. Those are simple ways. Then there's more complex ways to do it. For instance, I know several people who have actually started publishing companies, and I think that's a really noble endeavor if you have the energy, the time, the money, and they're all writers themselves. So I think those are just things to keep in mind as part of being part of a community. And I had many more details, but they were lost on the freeway. So, go ahead, yeah.
In a lot of your poems, especially in the education section, obviously, you talk about institutionalized education and kind of, you have a lot of views on that. And I
the influence that these poems come out of, kind of your view
On education?
yeah, and kind of like the institutionalized kind of
Okay.
belly.
Okay. Well, I'm an educated person, and I have good degrees, you know. But you know, I wasn't a good student growing up, and I had to go to the like, you know, like the school. In the high school they have that special school for the people who are failing. I was in that school, and I wasn't a good student. I wasn't serious. I had to grow up a little, and I don't know. I having raised children now with school has a lot of it has a lot of flaws. I don't want to be too critical of it, though. All the teachers I've ever known pretty much were great people, including my kids' teachers. But I think that, I guess what I was trying to get at in that education poem was that you are always learning your whole life, and you're always going to be learning, and what you think you were when you were young and what you were learning when you're young is not the whole of education. Education is also what you learn living and what you learn from reading and knowing things as you get older. I actually think that after I got out of school, I read a lot after I got out of school. I mean, I think I really, really read a lot of poetry, a lot of things. So in other words, it's not the be-all and end-all of everything, I guess. And I'm kind of a social critic, and I'm kind of, maybe sometimes I go too far, even. I don't know. Like I said, in other words, this thing wouldn't exist here without education, without people who believe in it, without people who donate money to it. It's not something to dismiss either, so I don't want to do that either. But I think that, I don't know, when I was growing up anyway, there were always these sort of petty things in education, and I think you do find them even in higher education. You find them everywhere, where people are enamored of their sort of petty rules and things, and so, or their ideas and their rigidity. And I think that you want to be open and welcoming of a lot of different ideas. And I think that when I was getting my MFA, I was going to talk about that a little bit. There was kind of a model of what you were supposed to be as a poet, and there were sort of these two competing things. And I'm going to simplify this greatly, but there was language poetry and new formalism, and it was sort of the left and the right, the Reagan era people, and people looked at it that way, that was, the right wing were new formalists, the left wing were language poets. And I think for a lot of us, it was just like we didn't relate to it at all. And there was kind of but at the same time, there were people who were very rigid and dismissing other people who had other ideas, either on each side or somewhere in the middle or somewhere on the outskirts. And there were outskirts, definitely. And I guess my feeling after being in that world was, I wanted, when we did a reading series, or even working in a public library, it's like, a big picture, openness, diversity, inclusion. I think that there's something to be said for every kind of expression. Some is not going to be as good as others. When you're teaching, some people don't have the same ambitions. They are not necessarily as talented, let's say, but you have to be kind, let's say. I mean, it's almost the easiest, it's almost the secret in a way, is, so I don't know how I got into this. I guess I was saying about education. So I think that was something that I found. I had that one poem about, quoting Yeats, where he says, the Catullus scholars, does their Catullus walk that way, the way they are so bland? And Catullus is a very dirty body, scatological poet. And I think that that's a risk everybody takes in life, that they're going to become a very dreary person. In fact, Donald Hall has had a really good quote that I brought with me, which was effectively, when people talk about the death of poetry and how much better it was when they were young, they haven't probably been reading it, they haven't been paying attention, or they had some notion of it and they're not really looking at what's going on, say, with younger people or in the world as it is today. And, I think that's just true of people. They want to listen to the same pop songs they listen to and things like that. And, everybody does that a little bit, but so those might be concerns of older people. I don't know if that makes any difference to you. I hope it makes some sense. But on what I just said, I think community is a positive thing. I think it needs contributors. It can be divisive, but you want to be part of it in some way if you're committed to it. Like I always say, if poetry is my vocation and my work is my work. So I'll give a lot of time and energy to it, and it energizes me. It doesn't make me tired. We also need audiences. Whitman said to have great poetry, we have to have great audiences. So you can support people just by supporting them, going to their readings, reading their books, saying congratulations on Facebook when they get something. I think that you'll find ways when you get older and value what you can do. I had a friend who was very good at connecting people together to work together, and she was brilliant at it, and she got people from disparate worlds to work together. But she kind of devalued it in herself, and she felt sort of like if she wasn't getting a book right away, it was sort of not worth her time. And I think that don't ever devalue those talents you have, because they contribute to it too. Let's say you're on a poetry, and we had a reading series, and we had a group of people, and there were people, who were good at accounting, and that has a value actually, because it helped us that way. So in other words, if you're a good organizer, there's many, many people who organize reading series, for instance, or who edit. And I would just say that will change your whole life. And also when you are contributing and you're publishing, and people do you favors, do them favors, do something for them, and that's kind of how it works. And I think that it can't just all be about you. You have to be helping other people and mentoring other people if that's your role. I guess that would be my last thing on that would be, let me see if I can say that better. And then be open to change. Don't become that everything has to be the same. That the world always has to be the same, or a certain kind of aesthetic is always the same, because people die that way creatively. Give and don't expect anything in return, but you'll find that people will do you a good favor later. And people are smarter than you think. They can feel it when you're trying to use them or whatever. I guess that's it. Value other people and help them when they help you. So, okay.